Hi guys. Tonight we step into a world where darkness ruled everything. Picture this. It's a winter evening in medieval England, and the sun has just slipped below the horizon at 4 in the afternoon. 4. You haven't even had dinner yet, and already the world is black. The cold wraps around you like a second skin, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings, not to call you to prayer, but to warn you that the night has begun. You probably wouldn't survive this. Not really. Not without central heating. Not without your phone's flashlight. Not without the quiet hum of electricity that follows you everywhere you go. These people did it every single night for 1,000 years. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are now? Now, dim the lights. Let your breathing slow, and imagine yourself stepping into a small stone house in the Cotswolds, where a wool merchant's family is preparing for a night that will last 14 hours, and where sleep itself was something very different from what you know. The year is 1412. The place is a modest but comfortable home in the English countryside, where rolling hills are dotted with sheep and the wealth of the nation is measured in wool. You stand in the main room of a merchant's house, not a peasant's hovel, but not a lord's manor either. Somewhere comfortably in between. The floor is packed, earth covered with rushes that smell faintly of dried lavender and something else. Something earthier. Sheep. Probably. Everything here smells a little like sheep. The fire crackles in the central hearth, and the smoke rises toward a hole in the roof. Though not all of it makes it out. Your eyes sting slightly. You'll get used to it. Everyone here has. This is the moment just after sunset. And already the household is shifting into a different rhythm. The merchant, let's call him Thomas, because every third man in medieval England was named Thomas, is checking the door one last time. His wife is banking the fire, carefully arranging the coals so they'll smoulder through the night without consuming all their fuel. 2 children sit near the hearth, their faces lit orange and gold, waiting. A servant girl sweeps the last of the day's debris toward the door. No one is panicking. No one is rushing. But there's a quiet urgency to everything. A sense that the light is leaving, and there are things that must be done before it goes completely. Here's the thing about medieval nights that's hard for us to truly grasp. They were long, absurdly, almost comically long in winter. In December, in this part of England, the sun sets around 4 in the afternoon and doesn't rise again until nearly 8 in the morning. That's 16 hours of darkness. 16 hours. You could watch the entire extended edition of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and still have time for a nap before dawn. And here's the curious detail historians love to mention. People didn't fight it. They didn't rage against the dying of the light. They surrendered to it. Because what else could you do? Candles were expensive. Oil lamps were expensive. Even rushlights, those sad little medieval attempts at illumination made from reeds dipped in animal fat, cost time and resources that most families couldn't waste on simply staying awake. So they slept. But not the way you sleep. You sleep in one block, don't you? You lie down. You close your eyes. And if everything goes well, you wake up 7 or 8 hours later, wondering why your alarm is so loud and so cruel. That's normal to you. That's how sleep works. Except it isn't. Or rather, it wasn't. For most of human history, sleep was not a single event. It was 2 events, separated by an hour or 2 of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. First sleep, second sleep, and in between, something called the watch or the watching hour, a period of time that medieval people treated as completely ordinary, even useful, and that we have almost entirely forgotten. Historians still argue about exactly when this pattern disappeared and why. Some point to the arrival of street lighting in major cities during the 17th century. Others blame the coffee houses that sprang up across Europe, giving people reasons to stay awake later into the evening. Still others suggest it was the Industrial Revolution that finally killed segmented sleep, forcing workers into rigid schedules that demanded one consolidated rest period. But in 1412, in this wool merchant's house in the Cotswolds, none of that has happened yet. The pattern is ancient and unquestioned. You sleep when darkness falls. You wake sometime around midnight. You do things, quiet things, and then you sleep again until dawn. The fire pops, sending a small shower of sparks up toward the smoke hole. One of the children yawns a real yawn, not a polite one, the kind that shows all your teeth and makes your jaw crack. The servant girl has finished her sweeping and is now pulling a thin blanket from a chest near the wall. Thomas looks at you, or rather, he looks through you, because you're not really here, you're a visitor from another time, watching through the veil of centuries. But if he could see you, he'd probably wonder why you look so confused, why you're still standing there in the fading light like you're waiting for something. The night is here. The fire is banked. The door is barred. What else is there to do but sleep? You'll understand soon enough. The household is about to teach you something your own century has forgotten, that darkness isn't your enemy, that wakefulness in the night isn't a disorder, and that the hours between midnight and dawn once belonged to the living just as much as the hours of daylight. But first, you need to lie down. First, you need to experience what they called first sleep. And for that, you'll need to see where medieval people actually slept, which, I should warn you, might change how you feel about your own bed forever. The last grey light is fading from the single window, a small opening covered with oiled linen rather than glass, because glass is for churches and lords, not for wool merchants, however successful they might be. The linen lets in just enough light to see shapes, just enough air to keep the room from becoming suffocating. Right now, it lets in the cold. You can feel it creeping through, a subtle invasion that the fire struggles to repel. Thomas's wife, her name is Agnes, because every third woman in medieval England was named Agnes or Joan or Margaret, moves with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. She takes the iron poker and pushes the burning logs apart, separating them so they'll smolder slowly rather than blaze and burn out. Then she rakes ash over the coals, burying them like secrets. The fire dims but doesn't die. It will sleep too, in its way, holding on to just enough heat to be coaxed back to life in the morning. This is critical. If the fire goes out completely, someone will have to strike flint and steel in the frozen dark. And that is nobody's idea of a good time. Or worse, they'll have to borrow embers from a neighbor, carrying them through the streets in a clay pot, hoping they don't die before you get home. The phrase "keeping the home fires burning" isn't just poetry. It's survival. The door is already barred, a thick oak beam dropped into iron brackets. You heard Thomas do it earlier. The heavy thunk of wood against wood. There's something final about that sound. The outside world is now officially outside. Whatever is out there, and there are things out there, things that move in the dark. Things with 2 legs and 4 legs, and possibly no legs at all. Depending on how superstitious you're feeling, it cannot get in. Probably now comes the part you've been curious about. The beds. You look around the room and realize there's only one bed. One actual bed. pushed against the far wall, away from the draft of the door. It's larger than you expected, not quite king-sized by modern standards, but substantial. A wooden frame, rope supports stretched across it instead of springs, and on top of that, a mattress stuffed with straw and wool. The wool merchant sleeps on wool. There's a certain poetry to that. Or perhaps just practicality. But here's where it gets interesting. That one bed is not for one person. It's not even for two people. Thomas and Agnes will sleep there, obviously, but so will their youngest child, a boy of about 4 who still needs the warmth of bodies on either side of him. The older child, a girl of perhaps 10, will sleep at the foot of the bed, curled crosswise like a dog, and on particularly cold nights like this one, the servant girl might join them too, pressed against the edge. Because warmth is warmth, and nobody has time for false modesty when the temperature drops below freezing. This is the thing about medieval sleep that shocks modern sensibilities. It was communal, deeply, unavoidably, sometimes uncomfortably communal. Privacy was a luxury that barely existed, and the idea of sleeping alone was almost unthinkable for anyone who wasn't very rich or very strange. Historians have found records of inns where 6 or 8 strangers would share a single bed, top to tail, breathing each other's air all night long. There are court cases, actual legal documents describing disputes that arose from these arrangements. A merchant accusing a fellow traveler of theft, a woman claiming assault, a man complaining that his bedfellow snored so loudly that he couldn't sleep and therefore deserved a refund. Medieval problems, really. The smell hits you as you get closer to the bed. It's not a bad smell. Exactly. Or rather, your modern nose thinks it's bad. But your medieval self would find it perfectly ordinary. Wool and straw and dried lavender and human bodies that haven't bathed in a while. The concept of bathing existed, but it was an occasional thing. A special occasion. Not a daily ritual. You washed your hands and face. You might wash other parts if you were feeling ambitious. But full immersion, that was for feast days and weddings and people with something to prove. Agnes is pulling back the covers now, and you see the layers. A linen sheet on the bottom linen was common even for middling families, because flax grew well in England. Then woolen blankets, 2 or 3 of them, heavy and slightly scratchy. And on top, for the truly cold nights, a coverlet stuffed with feathers or more wool, something to trap the heat that bodies would generate through the long hours. The children are already climbing in, squirming into position with the ease of long practice. The 4-year-old immediately claims the warm spot in the middle, because 4-year-olds have been doing that since the beginning of time. The 10-year-old sighs the sigh of older siblings everywhere and settles at the foot, pulling a blanket over her head. Here's a curious detail that researchers love to debate. The position you slept in mattered. Some medieval health manuals recommended sleeping on your right side first, then switching to your left after digestion had occurred. Others warned against sleeping on your back, claiming it led to nightmares and respiratory problems. There's still discussion among historians about whether anyone actually followed this advice, or whether it was the medieval equivalent of those articles telling you that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, technically from an authority, widely ignored in practice. Thomas removes his outer tunic, but keeps his underclothes on. Nobody sleeps naked. Not in this cold. Agnes does the same, loosening her dress but not removing it entirely. They will sleep in their clothes, as people have done for centuries, because the space between the sheets is the only warm space in the entire house. And you don't waste time getting undressed when every second costs you heat. The servant girl, you haven't caught her name, and you probably won't. Because servants' names rarely made it into the historical record is making her own bed near the hearth. A straw pallet on the floor, a single blanket, and the residual warmth of the banked fire. It's not comfortable by any stretch, but it's better than the stable, and considerably better than sleeping outside. You find your own spot, somewhere between the bed and the fire. Wrapped in borrowed wool that smells of lanolin and smoke, the rushes beneath you crinkle softly as you settle. The room is dim now, lit only by the faint orange glow of embers and the impossible distant light of stars through the oiled linen window. Everyone is in position. The nightly ritual is complete. And now, without ceremony, without a single word of good night, the household begins to fall asleep, not because they're exhausted, though the day has been long, but because there is simply nothing else to do. Darkness has claimed the world, and the only sensible response is to close your eyes and let it take you to. Your breathing slows to match theirs. The fire crackles once, twice, then settles into silence. Somewhere outside, a dog barks, but it sounds very far away. First sleep is beginning. You're lying down now, and the first thing you notice is that the bed is not soft. Not in any way your body understands softness. The straw mattress beneath you has compressed over months of use, forming lumps and valleys that press against your spine in unexpected places. The rope supports creak when you shift your weight, sagging slightly in the middle so that you feel yourself rolling gently toward the center, toward the warm mass of bodies already gathered there. This is what a medieval bed feels like. Not the romantic four-poster draped in velvet that you've seen in films. Not the rustic but charming wooden frame from that bed and breakfast you once stayed at. This is a working bed. A practical bed. A bed that exists to keep you alive until morning and has no interest in your comfort beyond that basic goal. The straw pokes through the linen cover in places, scratching at your skin through your clothes. You shift again, trying to find a position that doesn't involve a sharp point pressing into your hip. The rope supports groan in protest. Someone near you mumbles something that might be a complaint or might just be the sound of a person already halfway to sleep. Here's what you need to understand. Beds were valuable. Genuinely. Surprisingly. Almost absurdly valuable. In an era when most people owned very few things, a bed might represent a significant portion of a family's total wealth. Wills from the medieval period frequently mention beds as specific bequests, not just, "I leave my possessions to my son," but "I leave my great bed with the green curtains and the feather mattress to my eldest, and the second bed to my daughter, and my wife shall have use of the bed in the hall until her death." People cared about beds. They invested in beds. They argued about beds in court. A good bed was a status symbol, a declaration that you had made something of yourself in this cold and difficult world. The bed you're lying in now, Thomas, the wool merchant's bed, is a respectable specimen. The frame is solid oak, carved with simple decorations that suggest prosperity without ostentation. The mattress is stuffed with a mixture of straw and wool, which is considerably better than straw alone. There's even a bolster for your head, a long cylindrical pillow stuffed with feathers that everyone shares, their heads arranged in a row like sardines in a tin. But this is a middle-class bed, a comfortable bed, by the standards of the time. You want to know what the poor slept on. You probably don't. But I'm going to tell you anyway. In the humblest homes, and there were many humble homes in medieval England, far more than there were wool merchants, the bed was the floor. That's it. The floor, perhaps with some straw scattered on it if you were lucky, perhaps with a single threadbare blanket if you were very lucky, but often just the packed earth itself. cold and hard and crawling with whatever small creatures had decided to share your living space. Fleas were universal. Let's just get that out of the way. Everyone had fleas. The rich had fleas in their feather mattresses. The poor had fleas in their straw. And the desperate had fleas directly on their bodies with nothing in between. Medieval people didn't talk about fleas the way we would talk about an infestation. They talked about them the way we talk about weather, an unavoidable fact of existence. Sometimes worse. Sometimes better. Always present. The straw itself was rarely fresh. Changing your bedding required acquiring new straw, which cost money or labor, and so people slept on the same compressed, musty, increasingly aromatic straw for months at a time. Historians have analyzed medieval straw mattresses, the few that survive, and found evidence of all sorts of things living in them. Insects. Certainly. Mice. Occasionally. And organic matter that we probably shouldn't discuss in too much detail if you're trying to fall asleep. Here's a curious detail that researchers still debate. Some medieval writers recommended adding certain herbs to your straw to discourage pests and promote restful sleep. Lavender was popular, which is why Agnes scattered some in the rushes on the floor. Fleabane, yes. That's really its name, was supposed to drive away fleas. Though historians are skeptical about how well it actually worked, some manuals suggested rue, or pennyroyal, or other plants with strong scents that might mask the smell of unwashed bodies and aging straw. Whether any of this made a real difference is unclear. It probably made people feel better, which is sometimes all that matters. The warmth is starting to build now under the blankets. This is the trade-off of communal sleeping, the loss of space, the loss of privacy, the occasional elbow in your ribs in exchange for heat. Precious, life-sustaining heat. 4 bodies generate more warmth than 1. 6 bodies generate more warmth than 4. In the mathematics of medieval survival, closeness equals temperature, and temperature equals making it through to morning. You can feel the child beside you breathing, slow and even, already deeply asleep with the enviable ease of the young. The adults take longer. Thomas is still shifting, trying to find his position. Agnes lies very still, but her breathing hasn't yet slowed into the rhythm of sleep. The servant girl by the fire coughs once, quietly, and then falls silent. The darkness is complete now. Not the darkness you know. That thin darkness of cities where there's always a streetlight somewhere. Always a glow on the horizon. Always the small LED lights of devices watching you through the night. This is true darkness. Biblical darkness. The kind of darkness where you cannot see your own hand in front of your face, where the only evidence that you still have a body is the sensation of wool against skin and straw beneath your back. In this darkness, the sounds become louder. The soft wheeze of the child's breath, the settling of the house as timber contracts in the cold, the distant, irregular drip of something water from a roof, perhaps, or condensation somewhere in the walls, and beneath it all, like a bass note too low to really hear, the silence itself, the vast, heavy silence of a world without engines, without electricity, without the constant mechanical hum that follows you everywhere in your own time. This silence has weight. You feel it pressing down on you, not unpleasantly, like an extra blanket. Your eyes are open, but there's nothing to see. Your ears are straining, but there's nothing alarming to hear. Just the small sounds of life continuing. Just the breath of sleeping humans and the whisper of a fire slowly dying. Your body begins to relax despite the lumps and the pokes and the unfamiliar closeness of strangers. The warmth is working its way into your muscles. The darkness is no longer frightening, it's almost comforting. A soft erasure of everything complicated, everything demanding, everything that required your attention during the daylight hours. First sleep reaches up and pulls you under. You go willingly. Everyone does. In the end, the night is long, and this is only the beginning. The descent into first sleep is not like falling. It's more like sinking slow and inevitable. Like a stone dropped into deep water, you feel yourself going down, layer by layer. The sounds of the room growing distant. The sensation of the lumpy mattress fading into something you're aware of but no longer bothered by. The warmth has done its work. The darkness has done its work. And now sleep is doing what sleep has always done, pulling you under with patient, irresistible hands. This is first sleep. The medieval world had a name for it, though they rarely bothered to define it. Because why would you define something that everyone already understood? You might as well define breathing. You might as well explain what it means to be hungry. First sleep was simply what happened when the sun went down and the fire grew low and the body surrendered to the night. It was the first half of something, with a second half to follow. And the whole arrangement was so ordinary that writers mentioned it only in passing. The way you might mention that someone ate breakfast before leaving the house. The term appears everywhere once you know to look for it. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written just a few decades before the night you're experiencing now, a character wakes after his thirsty sleep and gets up to do things. No explanation. No footnote. The medieval audience didn't need one. In court records, witnesses describe hearing disturbances after the first sleep or before the second sleep, marking time by the rhythm of rest rather than the position of clock hands. In medical texts, physicians recommend taking certain remedies upon waking from the first sleep, as if this were as precise a measurement as noon or midnight. The phrase appears in French, too, premier sommeil, and in Italian, primo sonno, and in Latin texts stretching back centuries before the medieval period. Historians have traced the concept across cultures and continents, finding evidence of segmented sleep in places as distant as Nigeria and Brazil, among communities untouched by European influence. This wasn't a medieval invention. This wasn't even a European invention. This was, it seems, simply how humans slept before the modern world decided otherwise. Here's a curious detail that researchers love to mention. We don't actually know what medieval people called the waking period between sleeps. The phrase "the watch" appears in some texts, but it wasn't universal. Some documents refer to it as the watching, others as the waking. French sources sometimes call it dorveil, a beautiful word that combines dormir, to sleep, and veiller, to wake, suggesting a state that was neither fully one nor fully the other. A liminal space, a threshold time. Your breathing has slowed now to match the others. The child beside you twitches once a small spasm, the kind that happens when sleep catches you mid-thought and your body startles at the transition and then goes still. Thomas has finally stopped shifting. Agnes might already be dreaming. The servant girl by the fire is definitely asleep. You can tell by the change in her breathing, the way it's become deeper and more rhythmic, each exhale carrying a slight rasp that's not quite a snore. The quality of first sleep, according to those who study such things, was different from the sleep that came after midnight. Deeper, perhaps more immediate. The body had been working all day, genuinely working. Physical labor of a kind that most modern people never experience, and it crashed into rest with the desperation of true exhaustion. There was no lying awake worrying about tomorrow's presentation. There was no scrolling through anxious thoughts about emails left unsent. There was only the body's overwhelming need to stop, to repair, to sink into unconsciousness and stay there. Some historians argue that this first phase of sleep was primarily physical recovery, the muscles rebuilding, the heart rate dropping, the accumulated tension of daylight hours slowly releasing. Others suggest it served a protective function, getting the most vulnerable hours of sleep out of the way early in the night. When predators or enemies might still be active, there's still discussion among scholars about whether medieval people experienced different dream patterns in first sleep versus second sleep, though the evidence is frustratingly thin. What we do know is that first sleep was not negotiable. You didn't stay up late reading by candlelight. Candles cost money. You didn't lie in bed listening to podcasts. Podcasts wouldn't exist for another 600 years. You didn't do anything except let the darkness take you. Because the darkness was going to take you whether you cooperated or not. The fire has dimmed to almost nothing now. Just a faint glow. A suggestion of orange among the grey ash. Enough to warm the air immediately around the hearth, but not enough to reach you across the room. The temperature is dropping, degree by degree, and you burrow deeper into the blankets without really thinking about it, pressing closer to the warm bodies beside you. This is the genius of communal sleeping. As the night grows colder, the warmth of the bed actually increases, concentrated and recycled by the breathing mass of humans. It's not elegant. It's not private. Someone's foot is touching your leg, and you're not entirely sure whose it is, but it works. It has worked for thousands of years, long before anyone thought to call it a strategy. In your own time, you might have trouble falling asleep. Many people do. The mind races. The body refuses to settle. And sleep feels like something you have to chase rather than something that comes naturally. But here, in this darkness, in this warmth, with the rhythm of other people's breathing and the weight of wool and the smell of smoke and lanolin and humanity here, sleep is not difficult. Sleep is inevitable. Sleep is the only possible response to a world that offers no alternatives. You are sinking still. The last threads of consciousness are letting go, one by one. Like fingers releasing a rope, the sounds are fading, the sensations are fading, even the awareness that you are falling asleep is fading, replaced by something softer, something without edges. First sleep claims you completely. For the next several hours, you will be gone from this world, not dreaming, or if dreaming, not remembering, just absent. Just resting in the deepest way the human body knows how to rest. The night will continue without you. The fire will continue its slow fade. The cold will continue to press against the walls of this small stone house. But you will know nothing of it. This is the gift of first sleep. Total surrender. Complete release. The medieval night still has many hours left, and much will happen before dawn. But for now, there is only this, the darkness, the warmth, and the ancient rhythm of a sleep that your ancestors knew for 10,000 generations. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. You wake without knowing why. There's no sound that startled you, no sudden cold, no elbow in your ribs. One moment you were deep in the velvet, nothing of first sleep, and the next moment you're simply awake, eyes open in the darkness, mind clear, body still warm beneath the blankets, but somehow alert, as if someone had gently tapped you on the shoulder and whispered that it was time. You lie there for a moment, confused. In your own century, this would be insomnia. This would be a problem. You would check your phone, it would be 2 or 3 in the morning, and you would feel that familiar sinking dread. The knowledge that you should be asleep, that something is wrong, that tomorrow will be ruined by this unwanted wakefulness. You might get up to use the bathroom, You might scroll through social media, bathing your face in blue light. You might lie there for an hour, frustrated and anxious, waiting for sleep to return. But this is not your century. And as your eyes adjust to the darkness, though there's almost nothing to adjust to, just the faintest ember glow from the hearth, you realize something strange. You're not the only one awake. Beside you, Thomas shifts and stretches, a long, slow movement that ends with a quiet grunt of satisfaction. Agnes is already sitting up, her silhouette barely visible against the slightly less dark rectangle of the window. Even the servant girl by the fire is stirring, pushing herself up on one elbow with the unhurried calm of someone who expected this, who has done this every night of her life. The children sleep on. Children always sleep on. It's one of the few advantages of being young. Your body hasn't yet learned to interrupt itself. This is the moment. The watching hour. The space between sleeps that medieval people treated as ordinary and that modern people have almost entirely forgotten. And the strangest part, the part that takes some getting used to, is that nobody is upset about it. Nobody is lying there thinking, "Why am I awake? What's wrong with me?" Nobody is calculating how many hours of sleep they've lost or worrying about how tired they'll be tomorrow. They're just awake, peacefully, expectantly awake, as if the night had a natural intermission built into it. And this is simply when it occurs. Historians have pieced together what we know about this period from hundreds of scattered references, court documents, diaries, literature, medical texts, and the picture that emerges is remarkably consistent. People woke up. People stayed awake for an hour or two. People went back to sleep. And nobody thought this was remotely unusual, because it happened to everyone, every night. As predictably as sunset and sunrise, the timing varied slightly depending on when you'd gone to bed and how long you'd slept. But it generally fell somewhere around midnight. Some sources call this the dead of night, which sounds ominous until you realize they didn't mean dead as in lifeless, they meant dead as in middle, the deep center point of the darkness, the pivot around which the night turned. Thomas is getting out of bed now, moving carefully so as not to wake the children. The ropes creak beneath him as his weight shifts. And then he's standing, a warm absence where his body used to be. You hear him fumbling for something in the darkness, a chamber pot. Probably, because the first order of business upon waking was almost always the same then as it is now. Some things are eternal. Here's a curious detail that often surprises people. Medieval homes didn't have bathrooms, obviously, but they also didn't always have privies. Especially in winter, when walking to an outdoor latrine meant exposing yourself to potentially deadly cold. The chamber pot was the solution, a ceramic or metal container kept near the bed, used by everyone in the household, and emptied in the morning. The smell was, well, you can probably imagine, but you stopped noticing it after a while. The same way you stop noticing any constant feature of your environment. Agnes has found the tinderbox and is working on coaxing a flame from the banked fire. This is a skill, a genuine skill that took practice, and she does it with the efficiency of long experience. A few gentle breaths on the embers, a twist of dried grass for kindling, and then, slowly, reluctantly, a small flame catches and grows. The room transforms. Not dramatically, it's not like switching on a light, but enough. Shadows leap and settle. Faces become visible. The familiar shapes of furniture and walls emerge from the void. You can see your own hands now, and the wool blanket covering them, and the pale faces of the sleeping children curled at the foot of the bed. Some historians argue that this waking period was primarily practical, a biological necessity driven by the length of medieval nights. If you went to bed at 8 or 9 in the evening, sleeping straight through until dawn would mean 10 or 11 hours of continuous sleep, more than the body naturally wants or needs. The midnight waking, in this view, was simply the body's way of breaking up an unnaturally long rest period. Others suggest it had evolutionary roots, pointing out that sleeping in one long block would leave you vulnerable for extended periods. Waking in the middle of the night to check your surroundings. Tend the fire. Listen for predators. This would have been advantageous for most of human history. We may have been doing it for 100,000 years before anyone thought to write it down. There's still debate among researchers about whether the waking was truly universal or whether it varied by individual, by season, by age. Some medieval writers describe it as something that happened to them. Others don't mention it at all, which might mean they didn't experience it, or might simply mean they didn't think it worth mentioning. The silence of historical sources is always difficult to interpret. What we can say with confidence is that when people did wake, they didn't panic. They didn't treat it as a disorder. They got up, or they didn't. They talked, or they didn't. They did whatever felt appropriate for that liminal hour. And then they went back to sleep. The fire is burning properly now, small but steady, casting a circle of warmth and light that doesn't quite reach the bed. Agnes is heating something water, perhaps, or leftover pottage from dinner. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the smell of wool and bodies, and the faint lavender of the floor rushes. Thomas returns from whatever corner of the room held the chamber pot. He doesn't get back in bed. Instead, he sits on a low stool near the fire, close enough to feel its warmth on his face. And he simply waits, thinks, exists in the quiet darkness with no particular urgency to do anything at all. You sit up too, because lying down feels strange now that you're fully awake. The cold air touches your face and neck, a gentle shock after the cocoon of blankets. But it's not unpleasant. It feels clean, alert, like the night itself is greeting you, acknowledging your presence in its domain. The watching hour has begun, and you have absolutely no idea what to do with yourself. The strangest thing about the watching hour is how unhurried it feels. In your own time, waking in the middle of the night comes with a kind of urgency, a sense that you should be asleep, that every minute awake is a minute stolen from tomorrow, that you need to fix this situation as quickly as possible. But here, in the soft firelight of a medieval winter night, there's no urgency at all. There's nowhere to be, nothing that can't wait until morning. The darkness outside is absolute and will remain absolute for hours yet. You might as well settle in. Thomas is praying. You didn't notice at first because he's doing it so quietly. Just a low murmur, barely distinguishable from the crackle of the fire. His head is bowed, his hands loosely clasped, and his lips are moving in words you can't quite make out. A Pater Noster, probably an Ave Maria, the prayers that every medieval Christian knew by heart, repeated so many times over a lifetime that they became almost automatic, a rhythm of the soul rather than a conscious act of devotion. This was one of the most common uses of the watching hour prayer. The Church actually encouraged it, or at least acknowledged it, building midnight devotions into the structure of monastic life. Monks rose for matins, the night office, somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, filling the dark churches with chanted psalms and flickering candles. Ordinary lay people couldn't match that discipline, but they could offer their own small prayers in the quiet hours, speaking to God when the world was silent and the veil between heaven and earth felt thinnest. There's something almost beautiful about it, if you let yourself see it that way. The idea that the middle of the night wasn't wasted time but sacred time. That waking in the darkness wasn't a problem to be solved but an opportunity to be used. That the watching hour was, for many people, the most private and personal part of their spiritual life, a moment alone with the divine. Even if you were surrounded by sleeping family members, Agnes has finished whatever she was warming over the fire. She brings a cup to Thomas, just warm water with some herbs. Nothing fancy, and he takes it without interrupting his prayers, nodding his thanks. Then she settles beside him on another stool, close enough that their shoulders almost touch, and she begins her own quiet devotions. Here's a curious detail that historians have uncovered from confessional manuals and church records. Priests were specifically instructed to ask parishioners what they did during the watching hour. It was a standard question. Apparently, part of the catalogue of sins that confessors were trained to investigate. Do you use the time between sleeps for godly purposes? The implication being clear, there were ungodly purposes too, and the church wanted to know about them. You'll hear more about those ungodly purposes later. For now, the household is being quite respectable. The servant girl has gotten up as well. She moves quietly to the corner, where a bucket of water stands cold now. But still liquid, it hasn't been cold enough tonight to freeze solid, and splashes some on her face. A small gasp at the shock of it. Then she's drying herself with a rough cloth, blinking in the firelight, looking for something to do. There's always something to do, even in the dark. She finds the wool that Agnes had been carding earlier in the day, left in a basket near the spinning wheel. Carding doesn't require much light, it's a task of the hands, not the eyes, and soon she's working the metal combs through tangled fleece with the steady rhythm of long practice. The sound is soft and repetitive, almost hypnotic. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Like the world's gentlest percussion. This was another common use of the watching hour. Small tasks that could be done by feel. Women might spin or card wool. Men might mend tools or sharpen knives. People might eat a light snack if food was available, a piece of bread, some cheese, the leftovers from dinner still sitting in the pot. The watching hour wasn't productive in any ambitious sense. But it wasn't idle either. It occupied the hands while the mind wandered wherever minds wander in the middle of the night. Conversations happened too, though you wouldn't call them lively. Thomas and Agnes are talking now, their voices barely above whispers, discussing something domestic, the price of wool at market, perhaps, or the health of a neighbour, or what needs to be done tomorrow. The words themselves don't matter. What matters is the intimacy of it. Two people sharing thoughts in the darkness, with no one else awake to hear. Historians have noted that medieval letters and diaries sometimes mention important conversations taking place between sleeps. Decisions were made during the watching hour. Problems were discussed. Couples who barely had a moment alone during the busy daylight hours could finally speak freely. Their children asleep, their servants occupied, the demands of the world temporarily suspended. Some researchers argue that this was when genuine emotional intimacy happened for many medieval couples. During the day, marriage was often a practical arrangement, a partnership for running a household, raising children, surviving the endless challenges of pre-modern life. But in the watching hour, with the fire burning low and the darkness pressing close, there was space for something softer, something more personal, the kind of quiet connection that requires time and privacy, both of which were rare commodities. There's still scholarly discussion about whether medieval marriages were as emotionally distant as we sometimes assume. The stereotype of arranged marriages devoid of affection is probably overblown. People are people, after all, and hearts have been finding ways to connect for as long as hearts have existed. The watching hour might have been one of the ways they did it. You find yourself relaxing into the rhythm of the room, the scritch of wool being carded, the murmur of quiet conversation, the soft pop and hiss of the fire. These are the sounds of the watching hour, and they're not urgent or demanding or exciting in any way. They're just gentle background music for a world that hasn't invented background music yet. The cold is still there, of course. You can feel it on your face, on any part of your skin that's exposed to the air. But the fire creates an island of warmth, and everyone has instinctively gathered on that island, forming a loose circle of wakefulness in the sleeping house. The children haven't stirred. They'll sleep straight through until morning, probably, their small bodies requiring more rest than adult ones. An hour passes, maybe more. It's impossible to tell time with any precision. There are no clocks here. No glowing digits to check. Just the slow burn of firewood and the gradual shift of the stars outside the oiled linen window. You've lost track, and that's fine. Losing track is part of the experience. Thomas yawns. A real yawn. Deep and unself-conscious. The kind that signals the body's readiness to return to sleep. Agnes echoes it a moment later. Yawns are contagious. It turns out, and have been for centuries, and then she's standing, stretching, moving back toward the bed with the slow steps of someone who knows exactly where everything is, even in the dark. The watching hour is ending. But before you return to sleep, there are a few more things this strange midnight time was used for. Things the church had opinions about. Things that medieval doctors actually prescribed. The night is not done teaching you its secrets yet. The fire has burned down again. But no one moves to rebuild it. There's enough warmth in the room now. Enough residual heat in the bodies gathered around the hearth, that the cold feels manageable, almost pleasant, in a bracing sort of way. The kind of cold that reminds you you're alive without threatening to kill you. Agnes is back in bed, settling beneath the covers with the practiced movements of someone who has done this thousands of times. Thomas lingers a moment longer by the dying fire, finishing the last of his herbal water, and then he too returns to the warmth of the shared mattress. The servant girl has put down her carding and is curling back onto her pallet near the hearth, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. But before everyone surrenders to second sleep, there's something you should know about the watching hour. Something the church spent a great deal of time thinking about. Something medieval doctors actually prescribed. The watching hour was considered the ideal time for conception. This wasn't folk wisdom or old wives' tales, though there was plenty of that too. This was official medical advice, written down in Latin by university-trained physicians and repeated in health manuals across Europe. The logic, as far as we can reconstruct it, went something like this. After the first sleep, the body had digested its evening meal and was in a state of balance. The humours, those 4 bodily fluids that medieval medicine believed governed all health, had settled into their proper proportions. The mind was calm, unburdened by the day's worries, and the body was rested but not exhausted, warm from sleep but not overheated from activity. In other words, conditions were optimal. Medieval doctors recommended that couples hoping to conceive should wake during the watching hour and engage in what the texts delicately called the marital act. Some manuals got surprisingly specific. The woman should lie on her right side afterward, according to one physician, because the right side of the womb was believed to produce male children. Another recommended that both parties should be moderately warm, but not sweating. A third suggested certain foods to eat beforehand. Almonds were popular, for reasons that probably made sense to medieval humoral theory but seem almost comically arbitrary now. Here's a curious detail that researchers have found in multiple sources. Some doctors warned against conceiving during the first sleep, when the body was still processing dinner and the humors were unsettled. Children conceived in that state, they claimed, would be weak or sickly. The watching hour was the window, the sweet spot, the moment when nature was most receptive to new life. Whether any of this actually affected conception rates is, of course, impossible to say, but the advice was widespread and apparently taken seriously, which means that countless medieval children were conceived in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, their parents following medical instructions that now seem charmingly misguided. The Church, naturally, had opinions about all of this. Sex within marriage was permitted. The Church was very clear on that point, but it was also regulated, hedged about with rules and restrictions that could make the whole enterprise feel rather complicated. You couldn't have sex during Lent, or Advent, or on Sundays, or feast days, or fast days, or the eves of major holidays. You couldn't have sex if your wife was pregnant, or menstruating, or nursing. You couldn't have sex in daylight, or in church, or in positions that the Church deemed unnatural, which covered quite a lot of ground. What you could do, apparently, was wake in the middle of the night and quietly, discreetly, in the darkness of your shared bed, attempt to produce the next generation of Christians. The watching hour was almost sanctioned for this purpose, not explicitly blessed, but implicitly tolerated, as long as the act was performed for procreation rather than pleasure, as long as it happened in the proper position and between lawfully married persons. The Church looked the other way, or at least didn't look too closely. There's still scholarly debate about how strictly ordinary people followed these rules. Some historians argue that the Church's sexual regulations were more aspirational than enforceable, that peasants and merchants and even nobles did more or less what they wanted in the privacy of their own beds, and confessed to whatever seemed expedient afterward. Others suggest that religious guilt ran deep in medieval society, and that many couples genuinely struggled with the tension between desire and doctrine. What we can say is that the watching hour became associated with both the sacred and the sensual, prayer and intimacy, devotion and desire, sometimes within the same hour, sometimes within the same breath. The darkness made space for all of it. Thomas has climbed back into bed now. The mattress shifts beneath his weight, the ropes creaking their familiar complaint. Agnes moves closer to him, or perhaps he moves closer to her in the darkness. You can't quite tell. The children sleep on, oblivious. Whatever passes between husband and wife in the next few minutes is their own business, conducted in whispers and gentle movements, invisible even to someone lying just a few feet away. You stare at the ceiling or where the ceiling would be if you could see it and try not to feel like an intruder. Meanwhile, across medieval Europe, in monasteries and convents and great abbeys, a different kind of watching hour is unfolding. The monks have been awake for nearly an hour already. They rose at 2 a.m, or perhaps earlier, summoned from their hard, narrow beds by the ringing of a bell. Now they file into the cold stone church, their breath visible in the candlelight, their voices joining in the ancient chants of the night office. Matins, the longest and most elaborate of the daily prayer services, psalms and readings and responses, repeated night after night for centuries. A continuous thread of worship stretching back to the earliest days of Christianity. The monks sing in the darkness because the darkness is sacred, because Christ was born at midnight, because the resurrection was discovered at dawn, because the hours between sunset and sunrise belong to God in a special way, and someone needs to keep watch while the rest of the world sleeps. Historians have noted that monastic schedules were built around the assumption of segmented sleep. Monks went to bed early, slept for a few hours, rose for matins, and then returned to bed for a second sleep before the morning offices began. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, explicitly accommodates this pattern, allowing monks time to rest before and after the night prayers. The watching hour wasn't a disruption to monastic life, it was the foundation of it. Some scholars argue that the monasteries actually helped preserve and formalize segmented sleep in medieval Europe, giving it religious significance and institutional structure. Others suggest the causation ran the other way, that monastic schedules were designed around a sleep pattern that already existed in the general population. Either way, the connection between midnight waking and spiritual practice was deep and persistent, lasting for over 1,000 years. Back in the wool merchant's house, the night has grown very quiet. Thomas and Agnes have finished whatever they were doing or not doing. You really can't tell. And it's not your business anyway, and both are breathing the slow, heavy breath of approaching sleep. The servant girl is already gone, her small form motionless on the pallet by the dying fire. The watching hour is ending. The strange liminal space between sleeps is closing, and second sleep is reaching up to claim you all. But before you go, before you sink back into the darkness, you find yourself thinking about what just happened. An hour of wakefulness in the middle of the night, an hour that wasn't wasted or worried over, but simply used for prayer, for conversation, for small tasks, for intimacy, for whatever the body and soul needed in that quiet window between one sleep and the next. It doesn't seem so strange anymore. It seems, actually, rather civilized. Your eyes are growing heavy. The warmth beneath the blankets has reached that perfect temperature, the kind that makes staying awake feel almost impossible. The sounds of the house have faded to near silence, just breathing, just the occasional settling of timber, just the whisper of wind against the oiled linen window. Second sleep is calling. Second sleep takes you differently than first sleep did, where first sleep was a plunge, a surrender, a body exhausted by labor, finally giving in to the dark. Second sleep is more like a drift. You're already warm. You're already comfortable. The watching hour has loosened something in your mind, cleared away whatever restless energy had accumulated during the first phase of rest. Now you simply float downward, inward, into a sleep that medieval people believed was fundamentally different from what came before. And in this sleep, they believed. The dreams meant something. The idea that dreams carried messages was ancient long before the medieval period. The Bible was full of prophetic dreams, Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's visions, Daniel decoding Nebuchadnezzar's nightmares, the Magi warned in sleep to avoid Herod. Classical philosophers had written extensively about dreams and their meanings. By the time you're lying in this wool merchant's bed in 1412, the belief that dreams could predict the future, reveal hidden truths, or communicate divine will was simply assumed. Everyone knew it. The question wasn't whether dreams meant something, but what? Here's the curious part. Medieval thinkers believed that the timing of a dream mattered enormously. Dreams during first sleep were considered unreliable, corrupted by the digestion of dinner and the unsettled humors of a body still processing the day. These dreams were noise, static, the meaningless firing of an overtired mind. But dreams during second sleep, dreams that came after the watching hour, in the quiet stretch before dawn, these were different. These were the dreams worth paying attention to. The logic, such as it was, followed medieval humoral theory. After the first sleep and the waking period, the body had achieved balance. The stomach was empty. The blood had cooled. The mind was clear, uncluttered by the anxieties and distractions that plagued the daylight hours. In this state of equilibrium, the soul was more receptive to outside influences. Divine messages could slip through. Visions could take hold. The veil between the waking world and the world beyond grew thin enough to see through. Historians have found dream interpretation manuals from this period, actual books dedicated to decoding the symbols that appeared in sleep. Water meant one thing, fire meant another. Dreaming of teeth falling out, dreaming of flying, dreaming of dead relatives, each had its prescribed meaning, its prediction for the future, its warning or promise. Some of these interpretations seem almost familiar. Dream symbolism has a strange persistence across centuries. Others are utterly foreign, rooted in a worldview so different from ours that the connections no longer make sense. There's still scholarly debate about how seriously ordinary people took these interpretations. Educated elites certainly discussed dreams at length, recording them in diaries and letters, analyzing them with the tools of philosophy and theology. But did the wool merchant lying beside you worry about what his dreams meant? Did Agnes wake wondering whether her nighttime visions predicted good fortune or ill? Probably. Sometimes, people are people. The desire to find meaning in the random firings of a sleeping brain seems to be universal. You're sinking deeper now, and the edges of the room are softening, blurring, becoming less real. The breathing of the people around you has merged into a single rhythm, a tide of inhale and exhale that carries you further from consciousness. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you're aware that you might dream, that whatever images come to you in the next few hours were once considered important, even sacred. Medieval theologians divided dreams into categories. There were dreams sent by God, true visions, prophetic and rare, granted only to saints and holy people. There were dreams sent by demons, temptations, and terrors, designed to lead the dreamer astray, to corrupt and confuse. And there were natural dreams, neither divine nor diabolical, simply the product of the body's condition: what you ate, how you slept, whether your humors were in balance. The challenge was telling them apart. Some writers offered guidance, divine dreams. They suggested, left the dreamer feeling peaceful and certain. Demonic dreams brought fear and confusion. Natural dreams were forgettable, fading quickly upon waking, while meaningful dreams persisted in the memory. But these rules were fuzzy at best, and the anxiety of misinterpretation was real. What if you dismissed a genuine message from God as mere indigestion? What if you followed a demon's vision thinking it was divine? The church occasionally intervened. There are records of priests being asked to interpret dreams, to offer spiritual guidance on whether a particular vision should be heeded or ignored. Some dreams were reported to bishops, especially if they seemed to predict important events or reveal theological truths. A few dreamers gained reputations as visionaries, their nighttime experiences taken as evidence of special closeness to God. But for most people, most of the time, dreams remained private mysteries. You experienced them. You wondered about them. You perhaps told your spouse during the next watching hour, whispering in the darkness about the strange images that had visited you. And then you went on with your life, carrying the dreams with you like small stones in your pocket, not quite forgotten, not quite understood. The fire has gone completely dark now. Only the faintest warmth radiates from where the embers used to glow. The room is cold, genuinely cold. The kind of cold that would wake you if you weren't already so deeply on your way to sleep. But you are. The blankets hold you, The bodies beside you hold you. The ancient rhythm of second sleep holds you. If you dream tonight, you won't remember it. Or perhaps you will a fragment, an image, a feeling that lingers into the morning like perfume in an empty room. Medieval people paid attention to those fragments. They turned them over in their minds, looking for meaning, looking for messages, looking for some hint of what the future might hold. You don't have to do that. You can let the dreams come and go without analysis, without anxiety, without the weight of interpretation. But it's worth knowing that for centuries, the hours you're entering now were considered special, charged, a threshold between the human world and something larger. The darkness behind your eyelids is complete. Second sleep has you now, and it will hold you until dawn. Somewhere in the depths of second sleep, your ears begin to work again before the rest of you does. This happens sometimes, the body suspended in unconsciousness, but the senses still gathering information, still listening to the world, still alert to anything that might require waking. You're not awake, not really, but you're aware in some dim and distant way of the sounds that fill the medieval night. And there are sounds, so many sounds. The darkness is not silent at all. The house speaks first. Timber frame, wattle and daub walls, a roof of thatch that shifts and settles with changes in temperature and wind. You hear the creak of beams contracting in the cold, a slow, groaning sound, almost like the house is sighing. You hear the soft rustle of thatch above you, straw and reeds adjusting themselves against the weight of frost. You hear, somewhere in the walls, a faint scratching that might be mice or might be the house itself. Joints loosening and tightening in the endless conversation between wood and weather. Medieval buildings were never quiet. They couldn't be. They were made of organic materials, timber and straw and clay, and organic materials move. They breathe. They respond to the world around them in ways that stone and steel and drywall simply don't. Living in a medieval house meant living with a constant low-level soundtrack of creaks and groans and whispers. The building settling around you like a living thing settling into sleep. You've gotten used to it. Somewhat, or at least the sleeping part of your brain has learned to filter it out, to recognize these sounds as normal, as safe, as nothing that requires waking for. But they're still there. A background hum of structural noise that would drive a modern person slightly mad if they noticed it. Below you, beneath the floor of the main room, you can hear the animals. This is something that takes adjustment. In a house like this one, in winter, the livestock don't sleep in a separate barn. They sleep downstairs, in a lower level or an attached byre, their body heat rising through the floorboards to help warm the humans above. It's practical. It's efficient. It's also deeply, unavoidably pungent. But we've already discussed the smell situation, and there's no point dwelling on it further. What matters now is the sound. The slow, heavy breathing of cattle, the occasional shuffle of hooves on straw, the soft lowing that happens when one animal shifts and disturbs another. These are sounds that modern people rarely hear, the ambient noise of creatures much larger than you, sleeping just a few feet away. Their presence both reassuring and slightly unsettling. Historians have noted that this arrangement, humans above, animals below, was common across medieval Europe, particularly in colder regions. The design made so much sense that it persisted for centuries, and variations of it can still be found in traditional farmhouses in parts of Switzerland and Scandinavia. The animals provided heat. The humans provided, well, mostly they provided the food and water that kept the animals alive. It was a partnership of sorts, sealed each night by the shared experience of sleeping under the same roof. Here's a curious detail that researchers have found in medieval records. People sometimes talk to their animals during the watching hour, not conversations. Exactly, but acknowledgements. A farmer might go downstairs to check on a cow that was calving. A housewife might murmur reassurances to a restless goat. The boundary between human space and animal space was more permeable than we might imagine, and the sounds of the animals were part of the soundscape of home. Beyond the house, beyond the walls that Thomas barred so carefully at sunset, the night has its own orchestra. Dogs bark. This is perhaps the most constant sound of the medieval night dogs in the village. Dogs on farms. Dogs tied outside doors or roaming in packs through the dark streets. They bark at each other. They bark at foxes. They bark at nothing at all, or at things that only dogs can perceive. Medieval people complained about barking dogs the same way modern people complain about car alarms. Some things never change. There are records of villages attempting to regulate dogs, requiring owners to keep them quiet at night or face fines. The success of these regulations was limited. Dogs bark. They have always barked. They will bark until the end of time. And no amount of medieval legislation was going to stop them. Beyond the dogs, if you listen carefully, you can hear the wind. Not a dramatic howling wind, this isn't a storm, but a steady presence. A whisper of air moving across the Cotswold Hills, through bare winter branches, around the corners of buildings. The wind carries sounds with it. The distant creak of a neighbour's door, the clatter of something loose, a shutter, perhaps, or a piece of thatch that needs repair. The far-off cry of an owl hunting in the darkness. Owls were complicated. Symbolically speaking, some medieval traditions associated them with wisdom, following the classical connection to Athena. Others considered them omens of death, their cry a warning that someone nearby would soon die. There's still scholarly discussion about which interpretation was more common among ordinary people, or whether most folks simply heard an owl and thought nothing more than there's an owl. The church bells don't ring at night, not in a small village like this one. Anyway, but in larger towns and cities. They marked the hours even in darkness. Curfew bells at sunset, warning everyone to cover their fires and get inside. Bells for matins if there was a monastery nearby. Bells for emergencies, rung frantically to wake the town in case of fire or attack. The soundscape of a medieval city was very different from this quiet rural night. More layered, more interrupted, more impossible to ignore. But here, in the Cotswolds, in the deep of a winter night, the sounds are simpler. Dogs, wind, animals, the house, and beneath it all, like the bass note of existence itself, the breathing of the people around you. You can hear them all now, even in sleep. Thomas's slow, steady inhale, Agnes's softer breath, almost inaudible. The child's occasional sigh as small dreams move through a small mind. The servant girl's faint rasp, that almost snore that she'd probably be embarrassed about if anyone mentioned it. These are the sounds of survival, the sounds of people who made it through another day and are making it through another night. The sounds of warmth and shelter and the simple animal comfort of not being alone in the darkness. Your brain catalogues them all, filing them away as safe, as normal, as nothing that requires your conscious attention. The sounds continue, the night continues, and you continue sinking into second sleep, lulled rather than disturbed by the symphony of small noises that surrounds you. Somewhere, a dog barks again. It sounds very far away. You don't mind. You barely notice. The medieval night is singing you back to sleep. Your mind wanders, as minds do in deep sleep. and suddenly you're somewhere else. Not the wool merchant's house anymore. Somewhere grander. Somewhere with stone walls instead of wattle and daub. With tapestries instead of bare plaster. With candles, actual candles. Dozens of them burning in iron sconces along a corridor that seems to stretch forever. You're walking, though your body is still lying in bed miles away. This is how dreams work sometimes. They take you places you've never been and show you things you've only heard stories about. You're inside a castle, a real one, not the romantic fantasy of turrets and banners, but the cold, damp, echoing reality of a medieval fortress on a winter night. The great chamber of a lord is ahead of you. And even in this dream state, you notice immediately that it's not much warmer than the merchant's house. Perhaps colder. Actually, stone holds cold the way wool holds warmth stubbornly, persistently, with a kind of malicious patience. The tapestries on the walls aren't just decorative. They're insulation. Thick woven barriers between the people inside and the frozen stone that would otherwise radiate cold into the room like a curse. The bed dominates everything. It's enormous. A 4-poster frame of carved oak, heavy enough that it probably took 6 men to carry it up the stairs. Curtains hang from all sides, not the gauzy, decorative curtains of period films, but thick woolen drapes designed to create a room within a room. A cocoon of trapped air and body heat. When those curtains are drawn, the bed becomes its own tiny space, sealed against the drafts that whistle through every crack and arrow slit in the castle walls. Here's the curious thing. Medieval nobles often received visitors while in bed, not because they were lazy or decadent, but because the bed was frequently the warmest place in the entire building. Important meetings happened there. Documents were signed there. Ambassadors were received by lords who remained firmly under the covers, their heads propped on bolsters, their bodies wrapped in furs, conducting the business of kingdoms from the only comfortable spot available. There's something almost comical about it, once you think about it. All that power, all that wealth, all those servants and soldiers and vast estates, and still the lord huddles in bed because his castle is freezing. Money could buy many things in the medieval world. Defeating winter wasn't really one of them. The warming pan sits near the hearth, waiting for its moment. This is a metal container, shaped like a covered skillet with a very long handle, designed to be filled with hot coals and run between the sheets before the lord retires. It was a genuine luxury. Not everyone had one, and not everyone could afford the servants to operate it properly. The technique required some skill. Too many coals, and you'd scorch the linens. Too few, and the warmth would fade before the lord even got into bed. Servants were trained specifically for this task. Part of the elaborate choreography of putting a noble household to sleep. Remember the wool merchant's family. Climbing into bed together, sharing warmth because they had to. Here, in the castle, the sharing is different. The lord and lady have their great bed to themselves, privacy being one of the few luxuries that wealth could actually buy. But they're not alone in the room. Servants sleep at the foot of the bed, or on pallets near the door, ready to respond if their master needs anything during the night. A page might sleep across the threshold, literally blocking the entrance with his body. A human alarm system against intruders. Historians have found household accounts detailing these sleeping arrangements with remarkable specificity. Who slept where? What bedding they received? How close to the fire different ranks were permitted to lie? The geography of a noble bedchamber was a map of social hierarchy, with warmth and comfort distributed according to status as precisely as land or titles. Here's a detail that scholars still debate. How much privacy did medieval nobles actually have? The The presence of servants in the bedchamber suggests very little, but some historians argue that servants were trained to be invisible, to avert their eyes and ears from anything not meant for them, to pretend they hadn't witnessed whatever happened in the great bed. Others suggest that privacy simply wasn't valued the same way we value it, that medieval people were more comfortable with being observed, more accepting of the constant presence of others. The fire in the Lord's chamber is bigger than the one at Thomas's house, fed by servants who keep it burning through the night. But even so, its warmth doesn't reach far. Stand 10 feet from the hearth and you feel the cold creeping back. The stone floor radiates chill through the rushes scattered across it. The windows narrow and glassless, or fitted with glass so thin it might as well not be there, let in draughts that make the tapestries sway gently. As if breathing, you wander through the dream castle, observing details your sleeping mind invents from fragments of history. A chest at the foot of the bed containing the Lord's valuables, documents, jewelry, coins, because the bedchamber was the most secure room in the castle. A prie-dieu in the corner. A small kneeling bench for private prayer, because even lords woke during the watching hour and needed something to do with their souls. A chamber pot of pewter rather than ceramic, because even bodily functions had class distinctions. The sounds here are different from the merchant's house. Less animal, more human. Guards patrol corridors outside, their footsteps echoing on stone. Somewhere below, in the great hall, soldiers and lower servants sleep in rows, their combined body heat the only warmth they'll get. A hound whines in its sleep near the fire, dreaming dog dreams. The wind moans through gaps in the stonework, a sound that never fully stops in buildings like this. And yet, despite all the differences, the fundamental experience is the same. The darkness is still absolute. The cold is still relentless. The watching hour still comes, somewhere around midnight, and even lords and ladies wake in the black silence and lie there, thinking whatever thoughts the night brings. Wealth changed the details of medieval sleep, but it didn't change the structure. The rich had softer mattresses, thicker curtains, more servants to tend their fires. But they still went to bed when darkness fell. They still woke in the middle of the night. They still waited for dawn in rooms that were never quite warm enough, never quite bright enough, never quite safe enough to fully relax. The great bed, with its carved posts and heavy curtains, was more comfortable than the wool merchant's rope frame mattress. Certainly, but comfort is relative. By modern standards, even the King of England slept rough. Your dream begins to fade, the castle dissolving around you like morning mist. You're sinking back into the simpler darkness of the Cotswold house, back into the warmth of shared blankets and breathing bodies. But you'll remember this glimpse of how the other half slept. They slept cold, just like everyone else. The dream of the castle fades, and you're back in the wool merchant's bed, pressed between bodies that have shifted in your absence. The child has migrated during sleep, as children do, and is now wedged firmly against your side. One small arm thrown across your chest with the possessive confidence of the very young. You can feel the heat radiating from that small body, remarkable heat. Actually, disproportionate to the size. Children burn hot. It's one of the things that makes them valuable in a bed. Though that sounds strange to say. In the mathematics of medieval survival, a child wasn't just a mouth to feed or a soul to protect. A child was a heat source, a warm little furnace that gave back as much as it took. This is how families survived the night. Not through heroics or technology, but through geometry, through the careful arrangement of bodies to maximize warmth and minimize exposure, through the ancient understanding that humans are social animals for reasons beyond companionship, that we literally keep each other alive by sleeping close. The arrangement in this bed is not random. Thomas sleeps on the outside edge, nearest the door. Because if something comes through that door in the night, he'll meet it first. This is his role. His position, the place where fathers and husbands have slept for thousands of years. A barrier of flesh between danger and family. Agnes sleeps on the other outside edge, nearest the wall, where drafts are worst, but where she can easily rise to tend the fire or a crying child without climbing over everyone else. The children sleep in the middle, always the middle, the warmest spot, the safest spot, surrounded on all sides by adult bodies that block the cold and muffle the sounds of the night. Medieval parents understood something that modern sleep experts are only now rediscovering. Children need the reassurance of nearby bodies to sleep well. The isolation of a separate room, a separate bed, is a very recent invention and not necessarily an improvement. Here's a curious detail that appears in medieval medical texts and household advice. The elderly were often positioned nearest the fire, not because they were honored. Exactly, though respect for elders was certainly part of it, but because old bodies lose heat faster than young ones, because the circulation slows and the flesh thins, and the cold becomes genuinely dangerous in ways it isn't for the young and healthy. Grandparents sleeping by the hearth wasn't just comfort, it was survival strategy. The servant girl, you notice, has positioned herself between the fire and the door. This is also not random. She's the first line of defense against the cold that seeps under the threshold, and the last to benefit from the fire's warmth. Her position in the household is written in where she sleeps, just as clearly as it would be written in any legal document. Historians have found records of these sleeping arrangements in unexpected places, court cases, mostly where something went wrong. A fire that spread from the hearth and killed the grandmother sleeping too close. A child who rolled off the bed and was injured. A servant accused of theft, who claimed she couldn't have committed the crime because she was sleeping in her assigned spot all night. And witnesses confirmed it. The geography of medieval sleep was known and consistent enough that it could serve as evidence in legal proceedings. There's still scholarly discussion about how often these arrangements led to tragedy. Overlaying the accidental smothering of an infant by a sleeping adult was a real concern, mentioned in church documents and coroner's reports. Some historians argue it was common enough to be a significant cause of infant mortality. Others suggest the numbers were exaggerated by churchmen looking for excuses to regulate bedroom behavior. The truth is probably somewhere in between, as it usually is. What we know for certain is that medieval parents were aware of the risk. They developed strategies to minimize it, placing infants in cradles beside the bed rather than in it, or positioning them at the breast where a mother's body would curl protectively around them. Some regions developed special devices, wooden frames that created a protected space for a baby within the larger bed. These weren't foolproof solutions, but they were solutions. Evidence that people thought about the problem and tried to address it. The child beside you stirs, mumbles something unintelligible, and then settles deeper into sleep. You can feel the small heartbeat through the arm draped across your chest fast, as children's heartbeats always are. A hummingbird rhythm that speaks of metabolism running hot and quick. That heartbeat has been monitored all night by sleeping adults who aren't fully asleep, who remain alert on some deep level to any change in the breathing or temperature of the small bodies beside them. This is what parenthood meant in the medieval world. Not just providing food and shelter during the day, but providing warmth and protection through the night. The vulnerability of children was constant, a weight that parents carried into their dreams, a vigilance that never fully relaxed even in the deepest sleep. Medieval infant mortality rates were brutal. Perhaps 1 in 3 children died before their 5th birthday, taken by disease, by accident, by the simple fragility of small bodies in a hard world. Parents knew this. They expected it, in a way that's difficult for us to imagine. They baptized children quickly, sometimes within hours of birth, because an unbaptized soul was believed to be barred from heaven, and you couldn't take chances with something so important. And yet they loved their children. The historical record is full of evidence of grief poems written for dead children, tombs carved with small effigies, letters describing the devastation of loss. The stereotype of medieval parents as emotionally distant, too accustomed to death to form attachments, is largely a modern invention. People loved their children. They just lost them more often. The warmth in this bed is a form of love too. Practical love. Survival love. The kind that doesn't announce itself with words, but with bodies pressed close, with blankets shared, with the simple animal act of keeping each other alive through another night. You think of your own sleeping arrangements, your own bed, probably in your own room, with temperature controlled by a thermostat you barely think about. The isolation of it, the independence. No one's heartbeat against your chest, no one's breath warming the back of your neck. You've gained privacy. Certainly. Climate control. The freedom to spread out across a mattress without negotiating for space. But you've lost something too. This thing. This warmth that means more because it comes from another person. This ancient bargain of bodies that says, in a language older than words, I will keep you alive tonight if you will keep me alive. We will survive this together. The child sighs in sleep, a sound of perfect contentment. The fire has burned down to almost nothing, but the bed is warm. The bodies are warm. The long night continues, and everyone in this small house is still breathing. That's enough. That's everything. The night you're experiencing now, this long, cold, 14-hour darkness is a winter night. And winter nights in medieval England were a particular kind of endurance test. But it wasn't always like this. The same bed you're lying in, the same house, the same family, experienced something completely different 6 months ago. In June, the sun didn't set until nearly 10 at night and rose again before 4 in the morning. 6 hours of darkness, maybe less. Barely enough time to close your eyes before the birds started screaming and the light came flooding back through that oiled linen window. Medieval sleep was seasonal in ways that modern sleep simply isn't. Think about it. You probably sleep roughly the same amount year-round, 7 hours, 8 hours, whatever your body has settled on. The length of the night outside your window doesn't matter because you have curtains and alarm clocks and electric lights that let you impose your own schedule on the darkness. You've divorced yourself from the sun entirely. You sleep when you decide to sleep, not when the world tells you to. Medieval people couldn't do that. They were bound to the light in ways we've almost entirely forgotten. When the sun set, activity stopped. When the sun rose, activity resumed. The hours in between were for rest, and there was no negotiating with the terms. In winter, this meant too much darkness. 14, 15, sometimes 16 hours with nothing to do but sleep. And no human body actually needs that much rest. Hence the watching hour, that natural intermission that broke the night into manageable pieces. Hence the activities that filled it: prayer, conversation, intimacy, small tasks. The medieval night in winter was long enough to accommodate all of it and still leave time for 7 or 8 hours of actual sleep. But summer was the opposite problem. Too little darkness. Not enough time. Here's a curious detail that historians have pieced together from scattered sources. Summer sleep was often monophasic, one block, not two. When the night only lasted 6 hours, there wasn't time for a first sleep, a watching hour, and a second sleep. People went to bed late, genuinely late. By their standards, perhaps 9 or 10 at night, and rose early. And they slept straight through because they had no choice. Some researchers argue that this was actually harder than winter sleep. The body still wanted its watching hour, still tried to wake around midnight. But there was no midnight to wake into. The summer night rushed past too quickly, leaving people groggy and unrested despite the warmth and the ease of the season. There's still scholarly debate about how medieval people experienced this seasonal shift. Some sources suggest they simply accepted it, adjusting their expectations as the year turned, sleeping more in winter and less in summer without complaint. Others hint at frustration references to being tired during harvest season, to falling asleep in church during the long summer days, to the difficulty of staying awake when your body is running on 4 or 5 hours of rest. The watching hour, in this view, was a winter luxury, a gift of the long darkness, something that simply couldn't exist when the nights were short and every hour of rest was precious. You lie in the winter darkness and try to imagine a summer night in this same room. The window would be open, probably, letting in whatever breeze the warm air offered. The fire would be banked low or not lit at all, unnecessary in the heat. The blankets would be thrown back, bodies sprawled apart instead of pressed together, seeking coolness instead of warmth. The sounds would be different too. Summer nights had their own orchestra insects, mostly the endless chirping and buzzing of creatures that went silent in winter. Nightingales sang in the darkness, their complex songs filling the hours between dusk and dawn. The village would be louder, people lingering outside in the pleasant evening air, reluctant to go indoors and miss the brief respite from winter's memory. And the smell? Summer meant different smells. The heavy sweetness of flowering plants, the earthier notes of animals and humans sweating in the heat, the absence of wood smoke, which was everywhere in winter but almost gone when the fires weren't needed. A medieval house in summer was a different sensory experience entirely. Medieval calendars reflected this seasonal rhythm. The church recognized different lengths of fasting and prayer depending on the time of year. Work schedules shifted: longer days of labor in summer when the light lasted, shorter days in winter when darkness forced everyone indoors. The entire structure of life bent around the available light, expanding and contracting like breathing. Some historians argue that medieval people were healthier because of this seasonal variation. The forced rest of winter gave bodies time to recover from the intense labor of harvest season. The long summer days provided vitamin D, an outdoor activity that winter denied. The rhythm was natural, aligned with circadian biology in ways that modern life has abandoned. Others are more skeptical. Winter brought its own health challenges: respiratory infections from crowded, smoky rooms, nutritional deficiencies as stored food dwindled, the constant, grinding cold that wore bodies down even as it forced them to rest. The romance of seasonal living tends to overlook the genuine hardship of seasons you couldn't escape. What we can say with confidence is that medieval people understood time differently because of these rhythms. A winter hour and a summer hour weren't the same length literally. The medieval system of canonical hours divided daylight into 12 equal parts, regardless of how long the actual day was. A summer hour might last 75 minutes by our reckoning. A winter hour might last only 45. Time itself stretched and compressed with the seasons. The night you're in now is a winter night, and winter time moves differently. Slowly, heavily, Each hour feels longer because there are so many of them, stacked up between sunset and dawn like stones in a wall. You've already lived through first sleep, the watching hour, and much of second sleep, and still the darkness continues. Still the dawn refuses to come, but it will come. It always does. And in 6 months, when summer arrives, you'll barely have time to close your eyes before the light returns and another day of labor begins. This is the bargain medieval people made with the sun. Rest in winter, work in summer, sleep when the darkness demands it, wake when the light allows it. No negotiations, no exceptions, just the endless turning of the year, and the bodies that learn to turn with it. The child beside you shifts again, burrowing deeper into the warmth. Outside, the winter night continues its slow march toward morning. You have hours yet, hours of darkness, hours of rest, hours that belong entirely to sleep. It's a luxury, in its way, a cold, dark, uncomfortable luxury, but a luxury nonetheless. Summer will take it from you soon enough. The fire has died to embers now, and you find yourself thinking about light, not daylight that will come eventually, though it feels impossibly far away. You're thinking about the other light, the artificial light, the small, precious, expensive flames that medieval people used to push back the darkness, however briefly, however inadequately. The hearth in this room is the primary source of both heat and light, and right now it's offering very little of either. Agnes banked it hours ago, burying the coals under ash to preserve them for morning. The room is lit only by the faintest orange glow, barely enough to distinguish shapes. Certainly not enough to read by, or work by, or do anything useful. This is the natural state of a medieval night. This darkness that presses against your open eyes like something physical. But it wasn't always this dark. Earlier, before first sleep, there was light. Let's think about what that light cost. A candle in medieval England was a genuine luxury. Not the scented decorative objects you buy at home goods stores, but functional illumination that required significant resources to produce. The cheapest candles were made from tallow-rendered animal fat, usually from cattle or sheep. Tallow candles smoked heavily, smelled strongly of burning meat, and dripped constantly, requiring attention and trimming throughout their brief lives. They also attracted insects in summer and went soft in warm rooms, sagging and bending unless stored carefully. Still, tallow candles were what most people used when they used candles at all. The wool merchant's family might have 1 or 2 for special occasions, a feast day, perhaps, or when important guests visited. They would not burn one casually, just to extend an ordinary evening. The cost was too high relative to the benefit. Why spend money pushing back a darkness you could simply sleep through? Here's a curious detail that economic historians have calculated. In the 14th century, an hour of candlelight cost roughly the same as an hour of labor for a skilled worker. Think about that. If you wanted to read for an hour after dark, you were spending the equivalent of an hour's wages just on the light to see by. No wonder medieval people went to bed early. No wonder literacy was concentrated among the wealthy and the clergy. The economics of illumination shaped everything. Beeswax candles were better in almost every way, cleaner burning, less smoky, with a pleasant honey scent instead of the greasy smell of tallow. They were also fantastically expensive, reserved for churches and noble households, and anyone else who wanted to advertise their wealth through the quality of their flames. A beeswax candle burning in your home said something about you. It said you could afford to waste money on ambience. The church consumed enormous quantities of beeswax, Candles burned constantly in cathedrals and abbeys, before altars and shrines, in processions and ceremonies. The demand was so great that beekeeping became a significant industry, with monasteries often maintaining their own hives to supply their liturgical needs. Some historians argue that the medieval church was one of the primary drivers of European apiculture, that we have cathedrals to thank for the spread of honeybees across the continent. For ordinary households, there was a cheaper option than candles, the rushlight. You've probably never seen one. Almost no one alive today has. But for centuries, rushlights were the standard form of artificial illumination for anyone who couldn't afford candles, which was most people. Most of the time, a rushlight was exactly what it sounds like, a dried rush, the stalk of a wetland plant, dipped in fat and set alight. The result was a dim, sputtering flame that lasted perhaps 20 minutes before burning out. You would make them in batches during summer when the rushes were available, dipping them repeatedly in tallow or grease until they'd absorbed enough fuel to burn. Then you'd store them for winter, using them sparingly, one at a time, for those moments when you absolutely needed light and couldn't wait for dawn. The light from a rushlight was barely adequate, enough to find your way across a room without tripping. Perhaps enough to locate the chamber pot in an emergency. Not enough to read by. Not enough to do detailed work. Not enough for anything that required actually seeing clearly. It was light the way a whisper is sound present, but just barely. There's still scholarly discussion about how widespread rushlight use actually was. Some historians argue they were universal among the peasantry, the default lighting for anyone below the merchant class. Others suggest they were more common in certain regions than others, depending on the availability of rushes and the local traditions of candle making. The evidence is thin because rushlights were so ordinary, so unremarkable, that nobody bothered to write about them in detail. They were the background noise of medieval illumination. Oil lamps existed too, burning fish oil or vegetable oil in ceramic or metal vessels with floating wicks. These were more common in Mediterranean regions where olive oil was plentiful. Less common in Northern Europe where oil was expensive and animal fat was the fuel of choice. A few wealthy households might have had them, but they weren't typical of the English Midlands in 1412. And then there was moonlight. You might not think of moonlight as a resource, but medieval people certainly did. The full moon was a genuine event, a time when outdoor activities could continue after dark, when travelers could navigate roads that would be impassable in true darkness, when the entire character of the night changed. Moon calendars were important documents, tracking the phases so people could plan accordingly. A moonlit night was a gift, a moonless night was a challenge. Tonight there's no moon visible through the oiled linen window, or if there is, the clouds have hidden it. The darkness outside is as complete as the darkness inside, an absolute blackness that the modern world has almost entirely eliminated. You have to go far from cities now, far from roads and houses and the ambient glow of civilization, to experience darkness like this. Medieval people lived in it every night, or nearly every night, for their entire lives. The fire pops softly, a small sound in the silence, and for a moment the ember glow brightens, casting faint shadows across the room. Then it fades again, returning you to the darkness that is simply the natural state of things. Light was precious because light was rare. The medieval night wasn't illuminated, it was endured. You didn't fight the darkness you couldn't afford to. Literally, you surrendered to it, as Thomas and Agnes have surrendered, as the children have surrendered, as everyone in this village and every village across England has surrendered tonight. The darkness holds you now, gentle and absolute. And somewhere in that holding, You begin to understand why medieval people didn't fear the night the way you might expect. They'd made their peace with it. They had no choice. But peace with darkness is not the same as comfort in it. Medieval people had made their accommodations with the night. Yes, they slept when it told them to sleep, woke when their bodies woke them, surrendered to the blackness because fighting it was impossible. But surrender is not the same as safety. And the night, even a familiar night, even a night spent in your own bed, surrounded by your own family, carried fears that daylight kept at bay. Some of those fears were practical. Thieves operated in darkness. Obviously, this is not unique to the medieval period. But in a world without police, without street lighting, without locks more sophisticated than a wooden bar across a door, the threat felt more immediate. A determined intruder could break into most homes with nothing more than patience and a strong shoulder. The darkness would cover their approach, muffle the sounds of entry, and give them time to take what they wanted before anyone could respond. Thomas barred the door for a reason. That heavy oak beam wasn't ceremony. It was the difference between sleeping safely and waking to find a stranger in your house with unknown intentions. Court records from the period are full of nighttime crimes, burglaries, assaults, murders committed under cover of darkness by people who understood that the night provided opportunities the day did not. Some criminals became almost legendary, their exploits whispered about in taverns and marketplaces. The roads between towns were particularly dangerous after sunset, haunted by outlaws who preyed on travelers foolish or desperate enough to journey in the dark. Here's a curious detail that appears in multiple sources. Medieval people sometimes recognized criminals by sound rather than sight. A distinctive cough, an unusual gait, the quality of breathing in the darkness. When you can't see, other senses sharpen, and the medieval ear was trained to notice things the medieval eye couldn't. Witnesses in court cases occasionally testified that they knew who had attacked them not by face but by voice, by the particular way the assailant moved through the night. But practical fears were only part of it. The darkness held other things too, things that couldn't be barred out with oak beams or fought off with fists. Demons were real to medieval people, not metaphorically real, not symbolically real, but actually, literally, physically present in the world. They walked the night looking for souls to corrupt, bodies to possess, lives to destroy. The church taught this as fact, and most people believed it without question. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light, it was the presence of evil, given room to operate by the departure of the sun. Some demons were specific, named entities with particular powers and preferences. Others were vaguer presences, shapeless malevolence that lurked at the edges of perception. People reported seeing them, hearing them, feeling their touch in the vulnerable hours between midnight and dawn. Were these experiences dreams, hallucinations brought on by sleep paralysis, or the strange neurological effects of waking suddenly in complete darkness? Probably, from a modern perspective. But that modern perspective wasn't available. The experiences were real, and the explanation was demons. Priests offered protections, prayers to be said before sleep, blessings on the house, holy water sprinkled in corners where evil might gather, the sign of the cross made over the bed, over the door, over the sleeping children. These rituals weren't empty gestures, they were genuine attempts to create safety in a world where spiritual danger felt as immediate as physical danger. There's still scholarly debate about how much of this belief was sincere and how much was cultural performance. Some historians argue that medieval people truly lived in terror of demonic forces, their nights haunted by fears we can barely imagine. Others suggest the reality was more nuanced, that people went through the motions of protection without necessarily lying awake in genuine fear. The same way modern people might lock their doors without actually expecting burglars. What we can say is that the night was understood to be spiritually dangerous in ways the day was not. The watching hour, with its prayers and devotions, was partly a response to this danger, a way of asserting divine protection during the hours when evil was most active. You woke at midnight and prayed because midnight was when you needed prayer most. And then there were the fears that weren't about external threats at all. The fears that lived inside your own body. Illness could strike at any time, but it felt more threatening at night. A fever that seemed manageable by daylight became terrifying in darkness, when you couldn't see the sick person's face, couldn't gauge how much they were suffering, couldn't do anything but listen to their labored breathing and wait for dawn. Medieval medicine was limited at the best of times. At night, it was almost useless. If someone fell seriously ill between sunset and sunrise, you could do little but pray and hope they survived until morning, when help might be available. The sweating sickness, the plague, the countless unnamed fevers that swept through medieval communities, these were nighttime terrors, because night was when you felt most helpless against them. You could hear someone coughing in the darkness and wonder if this was the beginning of something deadly. You could feel your own body aching and wonder if you'd wake up at all. Children died at night. The elderly died at night. People who had seemed perfectly healthy at sunset were sometimes cold by dawn. The medieval night was full of this knowledge, this awareness of mortality pressing close, and there was nothing to distract from it. No television, no phone, no book to read by electric light, just the darkness, and your thoughts, and the breathing of the people around you who might or might not still be breathing when morning came. Here's the psychological weight of it. Medieval people spent hours every night in conditions that would constitute sensory deprivation by modern standards. Complete darkness, minimal sound, nothing to do but think and feel and wait. Modern studies have shown that even short periods of sensory deprivation can produce anxiety, disorientation, and hallucinations. Medieval people experienced it every single night, for hours at a time, for their entire lives. They adapted. Of course, humans adapt to almost anything. The fears became familiar, background noise rather than acute terror. You learn to live with the darkness the way you learn to live with cold and hunger and all the other discomforts of pre-modern existence. It wasn't comfortable, but it was survivable. Still, the fears were there, lying beneath the surface, rising up in vulnerable moments, shaping the rituals and prayers and habits that structured medieval nights. The darkness was not neutral. It was not simply the absence of light. It was a space where things happened, where dangers gathered, where the fragility of human life felt most acute. You lie in that darkness now. Thomas and Agnes breathing beside you. The children warm against your body. The door is barred. The prayers have been said. The night is more than half over, and nothing terrible has happened. But the fears don't fully leave until dawn. They never do. The first grey light is still hours away. The night you're living through, this divided night, this two-sleep night, this ancient rhythm of rest and waking and rest again is already dying. You just don't know it yet. In 1412, in this wool merchant's house in the Cotswolds, segmented sleep is as natural as breathing. No one questions it. No one writes treatises explaining it. No one needs to. Because it's simply how nights work, how they've always worked, how everyone assumes they will always work. The watching hour is as ordinary as breakfast. First sleep and second sleep are as unremarkable as morning and afternoon. But somewhere in the future, your future, their future, this will all disappear. Slowly, quietly. So gradually that no one notices it happening. The two-sleep night will collapse into one, and within a few generations, people will have forgotten it ever existed. They'll wake at 2 in the morning and think something is wrong with them. They'll lie in the darkness feeling anxious and broken, never knowing that their great-great-grandparents would have found this waking perfectly normal. How does a species forget how it used to sleep? The forgetting began with light. Not all at once, but in pieces, spreading outward from cities like ripples in a pond. Street lighting appeared in major European cities during the 16th and 17th centuries. Oil lamps, at first, hung at intervals along main thoroughfares, pushing back the absolute darkness that had ruled urban nights for millennia. Paris was an early adopter, installing thousands of lanterns during the reign of Louis XIV. London followed. Amsterdam, already famous for its canal-side illumination, expanded its lighting network until the city glowed faintly through the night. The effect was transformative in ways that went far beyond safety. Suddenly, the night was usable. You could walk streets after dark without torches. You could see where you were going. You could, and this was the crucial change, stay awake past sunset and actually do things. Here's a curious detail that historians have traced through diaries and letters as street lighting spread. Bedtimes got later. People who had gone to sleep at 8 or 9 in the evening began staying up until 10, then 11, then midnight. The long winter evenings that had once been surrendered entirely to darkness became available for socializing, for entertainment, for all the activities that had previously been confined to daylight hours. Coffee helped. The first coffee houses opened in England in the 1650s, and within decades they had become cultural institutions, places where men gathered to drink bitter stimulants, read newspapers, conduct business, and argue about politics. Coffee kept you awake. That was the point. It was marketed specifically as an anti-sleep drug, a way to extend your productive hours into the night. The combination of artificial light and artificial wakefulness began to compress the night. If you could stay up until midnight drinking coffee in a well-lit coffeehouse, and you still needed to rise at dawn for work, something had to give. What gave was the watching hour. What gave was the gentle intermission that had divided sleep for thousands of years. Some historians argue that the upper classes abandoned segmented sleep first. Their access to candles and coffeehouses and stimulating social lives pulling them away from the ancient pattern. The poor held on longer, still bound to the rhythms of sunrise and sunset, still sleeping in 2 phases because their nights remained dark and long. But eventually, even they changed. The Industrial Revolution demanded it. Factory work operated on schedules, clock time, precise hours of arrival and departure that didn't bend to accommodate the watching hour or the rhythms of seasonal darkness. Workers needed to be at their machines at 6 in the morning, regardless of when they'd gone to sleep or how they'd slept. The luxury of waking at midnight for an hour of prayer and conversation that was incompatible with industrial efficiency. Sleep became something to be optimized, consolidated, compressed into the minimum necessary hours. There's still scholarly debate about exactly when segmented sleep disappeared from Western culture. Some researchers point to the late 17th century, when references to first sleep begin to fade from English literature. Others argue the transition was slower, continuing into the 19th century among rural populations. The evidence is frustratingly incomplete. Sleep is such an ordinary thing that people rarely wrote about it in detail. And tracking changes in something so fundamental requires reading between the lines of sources that weren't trying to document sleeping habits. What we can say is that by the early 20th century, segmented sleep was essentially gone from Western consciousness. Medical textbooks didn't mention it. Sleep researchers didn't study it. The idea that humans had once slept in two phases, with a period of wakefulness in between, had been so thoroughly forgotten that when historians began rediscovering evidence of it in the 1990 seconds, it came as a genuine surprise. Think about how strange that is. A sleep pattern that had persisted for thousands of years, across cultures and continents, documented in sources from ancient Greece to medieval England to colonial America, erased from memory in less than 3 centuries. Forgotten so completely that modern people experiencing the remnants of it assume they have a disorder. The wool merchant sleeping beside you has no idea what's coming. He doesn't know that his great-great-grandchildren will sleep differently than he does. He doesn't know that the watching hour, this quiet, sacred space in the middle of the night, will be abolished by technologies that haven't been invented yet. He doesn't know that someday, people will pay money for apps and devices that try to recreate the restfulness he achieves naturally, every night, simply by surrendering to the darkness. You know, though, you come from that future. You come from a world of electric lights and coffee shops and factory schedules. A world where the night has been conquered and compressed. Where sleeping once is normal and waking at midnight is a problem to be solved. And yet here you are, lying in a medieval bed, experiencing the rhythm your ancestors knew. First sleep, the watching hour. Second sleep, the pattern written into human biology, still there beneath the layers of modernity. Still trying to assert itself every time you wake at 2 in the morning and can't figure out why. Maybe it was never really lost. Maybe it was just buried. Maybe it's still waiting, somewhere in the architecture of your brain, for the lights to go out and the night to grow long enough to need it again. The darkness around you is complete and absolute. The same darkness that humans have slept in since the beginning. The Industrial Revolution hasn't happened yet. The street lamps haven't been lit. The coffee houses haven't opened. The clocks haven't started their relentless ticking. For now, in this moment, the old way of sleeping is still alive. The watching hour still matters. The night still has room for 2 sleeps and the quiet space between them. It won't last forever. Nothing does. But tonight, it's still here. And so are you. Section 16. Your body remembers things your mind has forgotten. This is true of many things. How to ride a bicycle. How to swim. How to flinch at a loud noise before you've consciously registered it. But it's also true of sleep, somewhere deep in the architecture of your nervous system, beneath the layers of habit and schedule and electric light. There's a pattern that still knows how to sleep in 2 pieces, that still wants to wake at midnight, that still reaches for a watching hour that modern life has taken away. In the early 1990 seconds, a psychiatrist named Thomas Wehr conducted an experiment that would change how scientists understood human sleep. He took a group of volunteers and removed them from artificial light. Not completely, they still had dim illumination during the day, but he eliminated the bright electric glow that modern humans live in. The screens and bulbs and ambient radiance that extend our days far beyond their natural boundaries. Then he gave them 14 hours of darkness every night, mimicking the long winter nights that humans experienced for most of evolutionary history. What happened next surprised everyone, including Wehr himself. For the first few weeks, the subjects slept enormously. Their bodies were catching up on decades of accumulated sleep debt. Years of shortened nights and ignored fatigue finally being paid back. They slept 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours, their exhausted systems drinking in rest like water after a drought. But then something interesting happened. Once the sleep debt was paid, the subjects stopped sleeping in one block. They began, spontaneously and without instruction, to sleep in two phases. They would fall asleep shortly after darkness fell, sleep for 4 or 5 hours, wake up for an hour or two, and then sleep again until morning. They had rediscovered segmented sleep not because anyone told them to, not because they'd read about medieval sleeping habits, but because their bodies, freed from the constraints of artificial light, reverted to an older pattern. Here's the curious detail that researchers found most fascinating. The subjects reported that the waking period felt different from ordinary wakefulness, calmer, more meditative. They described a state of relaxed contemplation, a peaceful alertness that didn't feel like the anxious insomnia of modern midnight waking. Some said it was the most restful part of their entire sleep experience. When Vere published his findings, historians began to pay attention. They started searching through old documents, looking for evidence of this two-phase sleep pattern, and they found it everywhere. References to first sleep and second sleep that had been overlooked or misunderstood for decades suddenly made sense. The watching hour emerged from the historical record like a photograph developing in solution, always there, just waiting to be seen. The implications were profound. Modern sleep medicine had been treating nighttime waking as a disorder, a problem to be solved with medication and sleep hygiene and cognitive behavioral therapy. But what if it wasn't a disorder at all? What if it was a vestige of something natural, something healthy, something that humans had done successfully for thousands of years before electric light and industrial schedules disrupted the pattern? There's still scholarly debate about how to interpret Vere's findings and the historical evidence. Some researchers argue that segmented sleep was indeed the human default, our natural biological inheritance, and that modern consolidated sleep is an artificial adaptation to artificial conditions. Others are more cautious, pointing out that sleep patterns vary enormously across individuals and cultures, and that what was common in medieval Europe might not have been universal. What most experts agree on is that waking in the middle of the night is not inherently pathological. Your body might simply be trying to do something it was designed to do, create a space in the darkness for quiet wakefulness. For the watching hour that your ancestors knew, you've probably experienced this yourself. Those nights when you wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, mind suddenly alert, body inexplicably awake despite the hour. You lie there feeling frustrated, wondering what's wrong with you, counting the hours until you need to get up and calculating how much sleep you're losing. The anxiety compounds the problem. You can't fall back asleep because you're too worried about not falling back asleep. The night becomes an enemy, and the waking becomes a defeat. But imagine approaching it differently. Imagine accepting the waking as natural, even welcome. Imagine lying in the darkness without anxiety, letting your mind drift where it wants to drift, treating the hour as a gift rather than a theft. This is what medieval people did. This is what Thomas and Agnes do, every night, without thinking about it. The watching hour isn't something that happens to them, it's something they participate in, a normal part of the night's rhythm. Modern sleep researchers have begun cautiously recommending this approach to patients with chronic insomnia. Instead of fighting the midnight waking, they suggest accepting it. Get up if you want. Read by dim light. Meditate. Pray. If that's meaningful to you, do the things that medieval people did during the watching hour, and see if the anxiety dissolves. See if the second sleep comes more easily when you stop treating the first waking as a catastrophe. The results have been mixed, because everything in sleep science is mixed. Some people find relief in this approach, others don't. Sleep is complicated, individual, shaped by factors from genetics to stress to that cup of coffee you had at 4 in the afternoon. There's no universal solution. No single correct way to navigate the night. But there's something comforting in knowing that your midnight waking might not be broken, that it might be ancestral, that when you lie awake in the darkness at 2 in the morning, you're participating in something ancient, something your great-great-grandparents would have recognized, something written into the human experience since before history began. The wool merchant beside you will wake again before dawn. Perhaps he already has, and you didn't notice. Perhaps the watching hour is approaching again, a second intermission in this long winter night. Or perhaps second sleep will carry him through to morning, unbroken. The pattern varying the way patterns always vary. Either way, he won't worry about it. He won't lie awake calculating lost sleep or catastrophizing about tomorrow's exhaustion. He'll simply accept what the night offers. Rest when rest comes. Wake when waking comes. And trust that his body knows what it's doing. Your body knows too. It's been doing this for 100,000 generations. Long before anyone invented alarm clocks or sleep tracking apps or articles about sleep hygiene. The knowledge is in there, buried but not lost, waiting for the lights to dim and the night to grow quiet. You might never fully recover the two-sleep pattern. Modern life makes it difficult, maybe impossible, to surrender to 14 hours of darkness the way medieval people did. But you can remember that it existed. You can treat your midnight wakings with more gentleness. You can lie in the dark without fear, knowing that the ancestors who came before you lay in the same darkness, and they were fine. They were fine. And you will be too. The night continues. The darkness holds you. Second sleep is almost over. The first light is coming. You can't see it yet, the window is still dark. The room still wrapped in the same blackness that descended 14 hours ago. But something has shifted. The quality of the darkness has changed, grown thinner somehow, as if the night itself knows its time is ending. The birds haven't started yet. The sun hasn't crested the hills. But somewhere on the eastern horizon, the sky is beginning to remember what color means. This is the final stretch, the last hour of the medieval night, the quiet bridge between second sleep and the day that waits beyond it. You're not fully asleep anymore, but you're not fully awake either. You're floating in that liminal space that belongs to neither darkness nor light, neither rest nor activity, the space where thoughts drift without direction and time loses its sharp edges. The wool merchant's family has made it through another night. This seems unremarkable to them. They make it through every night. After all, but from where you're lying. With your knowledge of history and statistics and all the things that could have gone wrong, it feels like an accomplishment. The fire didn't spread. The cold didn't kill. No sickness took hold in the vulnerable hours. No intruder broke through the barred door. The children are still breathing, their small bodies still warm, their hearts still beating the quick rhythm of the young. Another night survived. In the medieval world, that was never guaranteed. You think about what this night has taught you, not facts. Exactly. Though there have been facts about beds and candles, about church doctrine and medical advice, about the slow forgetting of segmented sleep, but something deeper than facts, something about darkness itself and what it means to surrender to it. Modern life is built on the refusal to surrender. You control your temperature with thermostats, your light with switches, your time with calendars that slice the day into precise increments. You fight against the natural rhythms that governed human life for millennia, bending the world to your preferences, refusing to accept the limitations that your ancestors had no choice but to accept. This is progress. in its way. Comfort and convenience and the freedom to structure your own existence. But something is lost in that refusal. Something about patience. Something about trust. Something about the deep rest that comes only when you stop fighting and let the darkness do what darkness does. Medieval people didn't have a choice. They couldn't flip a switch and banish the night. They couldn't stay awake scrolling through infinite content. Their faces lit by screens. Their minds buzzing with stimulation. When darkness fell, they stopped. They rested. They gave themselves over to the long hours and trusted that morning would come eventually. That the light would return. That their bodies knew how to navigate the night without their conscious intervention. That trust is harder to find now. You lie awake worrying about sleep, which is perhaps the most absurd form of worry ever invented. You track your rest with devices, analyzing the data, optimizing the metrics, turning something natural into something managed. You treat the night as a problem to be solved, rather than an experience to be lived. The wool merchant doesn't do any of that. He just sleeps. When his body wants to sleep, he sleeps. When his body wants to wake, he wakes. When his body wants to sleep again, he sleeps again. The simplicity of it is almost shocking from your modern perspective, where everything about sleep has become complicated, medicalized, fraught with anxiety. What if you could bring some of that simplicity back? Not the discomfort. Obviously. Not the cold or the fleas or the communal beds or the genuine dangers that made medieval nights objectively difficult. But the acceptance, the surrender, the willingness to let the darkness be dark, to let the night be long, to let your body do what bodies have been doing for 100,000 years without interference. The light is definitely coming now. You can see it. Just barely a faint grayness at the edges of the window. The first suggestion of color returning to a world that has been black for so long. The birds will start soon. The household will stir. Thomas will rise to unbar the door and check on the animals. Agnes will coax the fire back to life. The children will emerge from their cocoon of blankets, blinking and yawning, ready for another day of being young in a difficult world. And you will carry this night with you. The memory of what sleep used to be. The knowledge that the watching hour existed. That it was normal. That your midnight wakings might be echoes of something ancient rather than symptoms of something broken. The feeling of lying in true darkness. Surrounded by breathing bodies. Held by the warmth of shared blankets and the simple animal comfort of not being alone. The medieval night is ending. Your time here is almost done. But before you go, before the light claims you completely, let yourself rest a little longer. Let the last of the darkness hold you. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts soften and your body remember what it means to surrender completely to the night. The fire is only embers now. Soft orange light pulses gently beneath the ash. The last warmth of a flame that has watched over you all through the darkness. The cold is still there at the edges of the room, but it can't reach you. The blankets hold you. The bodies beside you hold you. You are warm. You are safe. You are exactly where you need to be. The sounds of the night have grown quieter. The dogs in the village have stopped their barking. The timber has stopped its creaking. Even the wind has faded to a whisper, as if the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for the dawn that's coming. The only sound now is breathing, slow and steady, in and out, the rhythm that has continued through all the dark hours, the rhythm that will continue through all the hours to come. Your eyes are heavy, so heavy, the kind of heavy that feels like a gift rather than a burden, a weight you can surrender to without resistance. The darkness behind your eyelids is soft now, gentle, Not the frightening void of the unknown, but the familiar comfort of rest, earned and deserved after a long journey through the night. You have travelled so far tonight. Through first sleep and the watching hour, through second sleep and all its quiet dreams, through the fears and the sounds and the prayers whispered in darkness, through centuries of forgotten rhythms, now remembered. You have lived a medieval night. And the medieval night has given you something in return. Peace. The peace that comes from stopping, from surrendering, from trusting the darkness to carry you through. The grey light at the window is growing brighter, but you don't need to watch it. Morning will come whether you witness it or not. For now, there is only this moment, this warmth, this softness, this gentle descent into the last and deepest rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift. Let the night release you into sleep. One final time, before the day begins. The wool merchant's family will wake soon. The world will start its turning again. But you can rest a little longer. You can stay here, in this quiet space, where the fire is dimming and the air is still and the darkness is your friend. You are safe. The long night has held you, and now it is letting you go. Sleep comes easily now, gently, softly, like a hand on your forehead, like a voice saying, "Hush, the medieval night is over, and you have survived it, the way humans have always survived it together. Warm, breathing in the darkness until the light returns. Rest now. Sweet dreams."